Hi, my name is Shaylin Hayes Raymond, and I'm an LCT-C in New Brunswick, Canada. I'm a therapist, and I talk about topics including misophonia, depression, anxiety, mental health, consumerism, ethics, and pretty much in general any topic that strikes my interest. Today I want to talk about Phil McGraw, otherwise known as Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil is an infamous psychologist who had a TV program from the early 2000s until 2023. The Dr. Phil Show has been marred with controversy for many years, including a Utah ranch where participants that Dr. Phil had sent claimed that they were abused, lawsuits claiming that Dr. Phil abused mental illness, lawsuits which accused Dr. Phil of sensationalizing mental illness reviews, and many other controversies such as the show having a toxic work environment. I cannot prove any of these, and since I'm not a commentary channel, I'm not going into a lot of detail on these particular incidents. I am going to link to them down below because they do show just the larger picture of everything with the show. But as a psychotherapist myself, I really want to touch on the overall picture of Dr. Phil and, in general, sensationalizing media on mental illness and mental struggles. And I do think that that is a really important part of this picture. The Dr. Phil Show did end in 2023, but we are seeing a rise of TikToks and other media which show people showcasing mental illness, including reaction content, where people read stories from mental health subreddits and comment on them. And many of these people are not professionals, so that also really worries me. But when it comes to the Dr. Phil Show in general and just this sensationalized view on mental illness, I almost see the content on Dr. Phil very similar to Maury or Jerry Springer. The 2000s were definitely an era where we'd like to sensationalize and watch reality TV that was very dramatic, which is how we saw the rise of the Kardashians, Jersey Shore, oh my God, 16 and Pregnant, and Teen Mom. And I am not innocent. I watched many of these programs, although Dr. Phil was not one I watched because honestly, it made me very uncomfortable as someone who was suffering from mental illness myself. I always felt that the show was just a little too much. So I'm not here today to discuss anyone's character or controversies. I am merely talking about the spectacle of media that surrounds mental health. And Dr. Phil was a very prominent figure in this space for 20 years, from 2002 to 2023. So that's a long time. So I think my main issue that comes with Dr. Phil is, as a psychotherapist, we often have ethical values, and I follow the CCPA. So I'm actually a member of the College of Licensed Counseling Therapists of New Brunswick. I am an LCT-C, so a licensed counseling therapist candidate. And the CCTNB actually follows the CCPA in Canada. And there is also the APA for the United States, as well as, separate ethical boards for each state and whatever practice a clinician follows. However, there's a through line through most of these ethical guidelines that almost always says that you should not talk about your clients. These guidelines are getting better over time, but in general, clinicians are not supposed to discuss their clients in a way that breaches confidentiality. And the Dr. Phil Show, of course, is a television show. It is not psychotherapy or counseling, and Dr. Phil is a psychologist, so he would be actually licensed he would likely have had a license to diagnose, actually. However, counseling and therapy itself should be done within the breaches of confidentiality. And Dr. Phil, of course, as a television host, was not acting as a psychologist in that role, but the lines got really blurry. By using the name Dr. Phil on the show, he was associating himself with his professional license and degree. Therefore, I do believe he should have been following the ethical guidelines of confidentiality, which cannot be done on a television program. So this is a really blurry ethical line, and I personally find it uncomfortable. I actually feel so uncomfortable about this that I don't want to share clips from the show in this video, because I think perpetuating this unethical behavior is not something that I would want to do as a professional in the field. I think that discussing people's personal lives and mental illness on a television program is a little bit disturbing, and I do feel that way about shows like Hoarders as well. Sensationalizing mental illness is something that I think first of all, it's cruel. Second of all, it's unethical. And third of all, I think it's a very blurry line, and the public does not necessarily have the tools to understand that these programs are not psychotherapy. They are not counseling. They are not a clinical environment. And that might be very obvious to some people, but for others, this is a man who is a professional. He's a doctor of psychology. And there are some people that say, Dr. Phil is not a real doctor. I disagree with that entirely. He has earned his doctorate in the field. There is nothing wrong inherently with presenting yourself with the degree that you have. Where the problem comes in is that he is blurring the lines between this television show and the practice of psychology. While I cannot speak for Dr. Phil's own, values, I do personally think that this is a practice that should be avoided. And there are some people like Psychology Today authors who have said, programs like Dr. Phil have come out and caused people to be more likely to seek psychological care. They came out in 2002 at a time when people were less likely to seek services. And there are some people who believe that this has been a positive in many ways for the proliferation of understanding and acceptance of mental health. But I do think that that has come at a price, because there's also very real people as guests. And I think you can talk about mental health and educate in a way that isn't exploitative, that does not necessarily have people at the forefront. You can have advocacy, education, psychoeducation, without taking people and, airing their dirty laundry for the world to see. And it's not even necessarily inherently bad to share people's stories if they are willing to share them themselves, to have conversations. There's numerous podcasts that do this. But I think it's done in a way that is easier to digest. And when we are doing these things, I think we need to be very specific, very clear that this is not a replacement for therapy, that this is only a means of education and sharing stories. And where I have this problem with sensationalizing media is that they're there for the story. They're picking the most extremes. Instead of, education, it's quips and sound bites that are, fun to share, programs that are fun to listen to, that have a real person at the helm. And I've talked about this on my channel before when it comes to misophonia and Dr. Phil, mocking a poor woman who has misophonia. And for those who don't know, misophonia is a fight, flight, freeze reaction to otherwise normal sounds like whistling, chewing, sneezing, coughing, etc. And I really disliked the way he treated people with misophonia. And just in general, I think the nature of bringing people onto a show to poke and prod at their issues for entertainment is what I have a problem with. And I think when we talk about mental health and mental illness and, the very human struggles that we deal with, I think we have to do so in a way that has empathy, that, protects that person's values, that protects that person's privacy, that there is a great deal of informed consent when it comes to this media, that they know that they are not receiving treatment, that this is more of an advocacy and conversation. And I do think there's a blurred line there too when it comes to, going on a show with the world's most proclaimed doctor. And I don't know what Dr. Phil's informed consent process is. I'm sure he has it very thorough, but I do think that also the public watching this program, even if you put disclaimers, even if you say this is not therapy, this is just for entertainment or for education purposes, there's still going to be a large portion of the public that doesn't necessarily know that this is a very sensationalized form of education and media. So I do think that there is room in this space to share ideas that, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can have media like this. We can have shared experiences. And I think what we need in this space is authenticity, values, consent, all of that. And I do want to say that in a way, I'm glad that shows like Jerry Springer, Maury, and Dr. Phil are kind of going away as the early 2000s have ended. We moved into the 2020s. But I do think that we need to stay vigilant, because just because, these big TV shows are gone, that doesn't mean that we don't still have podcasts, we don't still have YouTube and other media. And I think the main key point I want to have is that when you are consuming content about something as vulnerable as mental health, I think it's important to understand, one, who is presenting this information, two, who is this information about, three, why is this information shared, and is this information shared in a way that is not harmful to the individual, and four, should this information maybe not be shared, and would it be better within the confines of a mental health professional in a confidential, secure place that is not aired out to the world? Because even if people are sharing, stories and then there's reaction videos and it blows up, that might not be something that this individual was prepared to have become larger. So I think even if you're a content creator and you want to make content about mental health, make sure that this content is something that the person you are commenting on would be comfortable with you sharing. And even if something is legal, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is ethical or not harmful. And while I did go on about the Dr. Phil show today, I think in general, as a society, when we are talking about persons with mental illness or mental illness in general, we need to really consider that we are only getting a small portion of the picture. And while it is absolutely wonderful that we can share our human experiences with the world, that doesn't mean that there can't be a negative and a downside. And I think we should just always be a little bit more empathetic and a little bit more caring when we consume and produce content for the internet, or of course for a major TV program. So I hope this video was helpful, and if you would like more resources, please feel free to check out my links, and I hope you have a wonderful day.